Hello, Professor Passig.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for allowing us to interview you. We're very excited about it.
Thanks so much.
All right, so let's start. Would you please explain to our viewers what does it mean exactly, futures studies, and why is it futures and not future?
Well, it's futures because there is no one single future. We are trying to study a vast variety of different kinds of trends. And the idea behind that kind of study is not to predict what might happen, but to understand the possibilities that exist in order to come back to the present and devise the right strategy in order to either avoid negative trends that we think are negative or enhance positive trends that we think are positive. So the idea of studying the future is not to predict the future. The idea is to see what can we do at the present in order to control, if you wish, or take positive and proactive actions before things are happening. That's why we call it future studies. Now, how we do it exactly, this is a branch of another discipline or academic discipline, which is called systems theories. We are systems investigators, if you wish. We understand that there is logic behind how systems are evolving. And with that kind of logic, we are trying to figure out the vectors of systems. And this is what we tend to call nowadays future studies. So it's just another branch of systems thinking.
I see. So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is that you are basically all day looking at graphs of systems and cycles, trying to spot where we are on these graphs and cycles in order to see where we will be eventually.
Exactly. And since we are a very primitive species in understanding systems, we are just really at the very initial stage of understanding how very complex systems are working. We tend to add to our understanding what we call the predictive reliability of a model, which means when I speak about something that might happen, I always attach to it a figure that says how sure I am that I really understand how the system is working. And this is what we call reliability or predictive reliability of a system. In order to devise that reliability, of course, there is a lot of mathematics and statistics behind how we come out with that very specific number. But generally speaking, we are not prophets. The idea is to understand how systems are evolving, to understand how reliable the way we understand how systems are evolving, to project that understanding, and not to say this is what's going to happen, but to say, okay, this is what probably is going to happen. So let's see what can we do at the present in order either to avoid it or enhance that prediction or that future that we see at this point in time.
Yes. So when you are saying that an event that has a 70 to 80% chance of happening, it's not an actual probability that if this event would have happened 100 times, we would have seen it happen 70 times. You're saying it's a number that you're adding to just how sure you are that it will happen with your views.
Exactly. It's just, a number that says or quantify what we don't know, okay, what might change our understanding. So it's not what quantifies what we know, because this is obvious. When you speak about from a point of view that you know something, but it quantifies to the person you are communicating with that there are black spots that we as humans cannot even know what might happen, and we say there is a 20% spot of our view that is black, and we better pay attention that whatever we say might be even different. So that's the idea of the reliability of our model.
So I understood from previous lectures that you gave, and I watched, or your books that I read, that other methodologies are not as accurate. For example, brainstorming, which we all learned in school, is a wonderful technique. Turns out not so much when it comes to...
Brainstorming is a good methodology in order to solve problems or generate new ideas. But brainstorming is a very bad methodology to try to figure out the trend. The predictive reliability of brainstorming is about 7%. And this is how people really are really confused about a lot of the things that the experts are saying. Experts might come out with new ideas or even understanding what's happening now, but they cannot, with that methodology, come up with some trends that are really reliable.
So brainstorming essentially is who is a better science fiction author, so to speak. Who can...
No, let's not exaggerate, okay? Brainstorming can be one methodology that might help a group of people generate new ideas or solve a problem. If you take a group of, let's say, 50 experts in a very specific, let's say, engineering field of nuclear whatever, okay? And they have a problem. 50 people that are expert in a specific field might do amazing things in solving a problem with a methodology such as brainstorming. That, by the way, brainstorming has a large variety of procedures that you can apply. It's not one single methodology. There are a lot of variations to brainstorming, and you have an expert. You have to be very careful in devising the procedure and be aware of the pros and cons of each procedure so that you maximize the output that you come up with the specific methodology. So we have to be very careful. There are very specific methodologies that are good for different kinds of thinking. For futures thinking, there are other methodologies, and you have always to be aware that there is no methodology that is totally, proof and 100% reliable.
Yes, no absolute values.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you maybe give us a few of your predictions, and in order for our viewers to understand, how did you end up, for example, predicting the economic crisis in 2008, or you have predicted that maybe not specifically COVID-19, but you have predicted that an epidemic will occur, and you even predicted the location it will start in.
Well, for example, the 2008 economic crisis was built based on a model that was devised by a few researchers back in the 90s, in the early 90s. And the basic idea behind that model says that there is a group, a cohort group within a nation that is generating a lot of economic activity. okay, they are doing a lot of expenditures, they are doing a lot of really economic activity. So the idea behind that model says that if you analyze the demographics of a specific nation, and you see that that group is going to be a very large group compared to other groups in let's say in certain years, then probably at those years there will be a lot of economic activity, and the outcome is a boom in economics.
Okay.
Now, if you see that at a certain age, that certain age cohort, by the way, it's between the age of 36 or 35 to 46. This is the age in which, in Western cultures, we are very active economically. Okay, we tend to buy our large items, which is
Yeah.
our houses,
Yeah.
we
They
tend
have
to
a family, they need a car, they want a vacation.
exactly, exactly. So if you see that in a certain year, that group is shrinking,
Mm,
so you see that there is a correlation between that small portion of that group and economic activity. So from the beginning of the 90s, we said that the peak of a certain group in different nations is going to be so small at the year 2008. So we said
mm.
probably it will start, a chain of reactions that
Yes,
will bring the economy to what we call it a boost situation.
I see. So how did you know, for example, that we are going to hit another epidemic? I mean, medicine is amazing these times, and what changed?
Well, first of all, people thought that we are in the 21st century, nothing would happen.
Yes, of
Well,
course.
we know that first of all there is logic behind those kind of pandemics that occur during millennia. Okay,
Mhm.
we're not sure exactly how those pandemics are pushing evolution, but we know that there is a phenomena within systems that we're calling it pandemics that are pushing systems to continue and evolve physically, biologically, economically, etc., etc. That's one very important tenet of the idea of pandemics. The other one was that we are at an age in which we are very much concentrated in huge urbanic systems. So we said that it's only a matter of time until a virus will jump from an animal to humans and will spread. And it will take some time until we will find a cure or a shot for that kind of a
Yeah.
virus. We
Yes.
said that it will probably start in places that are very condensed. Probably the most condensed places now, urban condensed places, is China, and
Yes.
probably it will be somewhere that that humans are using or eating unusual animals, because viruses most of the time are jumping from animals to human beings,
Hmm.
pandemics. So the probability was that it will be somewhere in Asia and somewhere most
Okay.
probable in China. And
Yes.
it's only a matter of time that it will happen. And
So you
it will spread. That's it.
So you basically added the variables to the equation. You said we're growing a large number of animals. People live in very condensed conditions. People eat a wide variety of animals there. There's a higher percent chance that it will happen there.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by the way, the chance was something like 60%. Okay,
Ah,
it's not 100%. It's
no.
60%. Okay, that this kind of pandemic was between 60 to 70% chance that it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
in the third decade of the 21st century. Okay, there are other scenarios that are 30% and 20% that are much worse of what we see at this time. And
Yes.
those 20, 30% scenarios speak about not a, a virus that jumps from an animal to a human being, but a virus that we don't have any clue where is it coming from. It might even come from, let's say, out of space, let's say, a
Uh,
piece of rock that will come,
something. Yeah.
something that we don't have any clue where is it coming from.
Yeah.
That might happen in history, and it happened
Mhm.
already. It's not the first time that might happen, but
Yes.
the probability is really very low.
Okay. I see. All right. That explains it much better then. So I want to take you a little bit to your predictions around the world. You've made some very, very interesting predictions, especially how will the coronavirus affect international relations as we've seen them so far. Could you elaborate a little bit about that, please?
Well, like any pandemic, it's a trigger for a lot of change. And we're trying to understand what kind of change and transformation is going to happen in some time frames, in 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, 30 years ahead. And there are even some people that are trying to figure out how this pandemic is going to affect a century ahead. We know from history that pandemics had large effects. A lot of things are happening in different time frames. So if we're speaking about the next decade, most of the time, those kind of pandemics bring a lot of havoc in international relationships. Okay, geopolitics are going through a crisis that might even reach a point of real uh, and even wars between nations. Okay, that's in the time frame of a decade ahead. The more you go, forward in the future, the more you see that those trends are reversing themselves from populist leaders and crash between nations. You see that people are awakening to a different kind of consciousness, a more evolved consciousness, how humanity is entangled together. That's
Connected.
what happened after the Spanish pandemic,
Mm.
Spanish flu, because after that humanity has developed some new institutions like the how should we call it, the
An early,
social nets
yes,
of from public health services to really very interesting geopolitical, like the UN that was
yes.
developed step by step in order to tackle those kind of challenges the more we progress in time.
Hmm.
Even this pandemic is going to have great effect on let's say, human, how should we call it, institutions, global institutions. You see,
Yes, like the World
globalization,
Health Organization, for example.
exactly, globalization that we have experienced in the last 50 years was a kind of volunteer-based uh, coming
Hmm.
togetherness. Okay, if you were to accept to be part of large institutes, that was good. But if you said to yourself, "Well, it's not exactly something I would like to be," you retreated. Uh, so globalization was based upon voluntarily kind of relationships. Here we are speaking about something much developed. We are speaking about an understanding that being together is not just something that if you wish you can be part of, but you have to be part of something much bigger, because if somebody somewhere in an isolated market somewhere in the world eats something, has a great effect on all of us. So we need to develop some institutes that can bring that understanding into how we do business with each other, into the way we are going to develop, let's say, medicine, etc., in order to really not to
Go
get back
back.
in those kind of
Yes.
pandemics that we could have, avoided if we were just to understand how infused we are, not just how together we are. And this is a consciousness that will develop during the 21st century and will bring a lot of very positive things geopolitically, economically, socially, etc.
Yeah, so perhaps we will see institutions, world institutions that could either punish or reward
Exactly.
based on their actions.
Exactly, because for example, the World Health Organization was supposed to, his mission was to avoid those kind of pandemics, but it didn't
Exactly.
happen because it was a voluntarily kind of institution. They didn't have any authority to force their understanding how things are going to evolve. And what we've
See,
seen is in a matter of 2 or 3 months, things just
the entire world is in chaos
exactly,
because someone ate a bat somewhere.
exactly.
Okay. I want to take you for a book that you wrote a long time ago, 2048.
All right.
It completely blew my mind. I gave it to everybody that I could at the time. And in which you describe the main conflicts and geopolitical strifes of this century, the first half of this century. And you mentioned specifically 4 states. You mentioned the United States, Russia, Turkey, and Japan. And many of our viewers asked, why? I mean, you have China, India, Korea, all of sub-Saharan Africa. These states are not so important for our century right now?
Well, I need a lot of time to explain, but you have to read the book if you wish to.
I recommend it to everyone.
In a nutshell,
Yes.
it's one of the most interesting but most difficult issue to try to predict is world conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, people try to do it for centuries. There are libraries written about that issue. But one thing is striking: nobody could have predicted World War I, World War II, the huge conflicts that are shaping centuries. So we were trying in the last 30, 40 years to devise, different people worldwide, to devise a methodology with at least 60% reliability that will be able to see what are the trends, that the mega trends that might bring dominant nations in the 21st century to clash. That's the idea. So since there are almost infinite variables that work into bringing nations to clash with each other, the methodology I used in that book was to try to figure out what are the most important variables that when they come together, they have the chance to push our leaders to send the most important thing in our life, our kids, into the battleground. Okay, so we found 6 variables that when they come together, not by themselves, okay, but they need to fuse together those variables. And when they fuse together, it doesn't matter who's the leader, they will send our kids to the battlefield.
Doesn't matter who's the leader.
Doesn't matter who's the leader. And I was trying to figure out where are those 6 variables are converging in the next decade. Okay, so those variables are converging between Russia and the United States. They are converging. That's globally. They are converging regionally between Turkey and the Arab world,
Yes.
and on one side and the other side with Europe, and 30 years from now they will converge again between Japan and the Western world. Okay, so that's why those nations became very important the next decade and the next 3-4 decades, and that's
Yes.
why I concentrated on those nations. It doesn't
Yeah.
say that world conflicts are going to be only between those nations in the next 30-40 years, but
Okay.
these are nations that have a probability of 60% to clash. Okay,
I see.
there will be also the different places that they will clash
Okay.
together. And the assumption is that 21st century has its calamities. It's, people think we are at 21st century, there won't be any more
We're
wars,
advanced
etc.,
already.
etc. So the idea was, I said to myself, if I had that methodology in 1910, could I have predicted the World War One? Could I have predicted World War II? With 60% chance that I don't need more than that. Okay, and the idea is not to say this is what's going to happen, but the idea is to say if this is the what we call the driving forces that are in the making, let's see where can we bring the flames down as much as we can. Okay, that the idea is to avoid, with this kind of thinking, is to avoid those conflicts, not to say this is what's going to happen. Who we are to say what's going to happen? We have to be very humble. We are a very primitive species. We really don't understand how systems are evolving, and of course, systems that are bringing conflicts. So the idea is just to add another layer of thinking, or if you wish, we were taught to believe that if we are to study the past, that will help us, act a little bit more intelligently in the present. What we are saying is different. We are saying that if we are to take a look at the present from the future, we might add something different to the way we understand the present and see what we can do in order to change the present, not the future. The future is very, very difficult to change. It's so complex. It's so, very, very, very far from the imagination of humankind. We are just trying to a little bit be intelligent in the way we understand the present, because we really, even the present, it's very very hard to understand. You can see there are so many conflicting theories just understanding what's happening at this very moment, nonetheless speaking about what might happen in the future. So we are trying to say that if we will take a look at the present from a different perspective, not just from the past, but from the future itself, we might see the present a little bit different, and might act differently in the present. So this is the idea of trying to figure out even
Yes.
world conflict of the 21st century.
Yes, it's very complicated because most people are not used to thinking in these kind of systems, and like, for example, when I'm trying to explain to my friends from France or from Germany, the foreign students that I give lectures to, why is Turkey sending soldiers to Libya? Why are the Polish people afraid of the Russians? Why China, for all this time that they had a one child policy, have devastated their economy? It's very difficult to think so long term. We're used to thinking maybe 2 years in advance.
Well, and unfortunately, my book, that book of 2048, was published in 2010. Now we are
Yes,
a decade after that, and it's about more than 70% of what I said has happened. So even the reliability of the methodology has been a little bit,
enhanced.
enhanced. Exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
which is amazing, you know. But the idea at that time when I wrote the book was not to say this is what's going to happen. The idea to say this might happen, so be careful.
and
But people are
now it's
not
happening.
listening. People are
Yes,
not listening. That's the most devastating, thing in my field of expertise. You say things, and people are not listening. And when things really are being realized, they say, "Wow, wow, how smart you were!" But
yeah.
the idea was not to be smart. The idea was
Not to be
not
smart.
exactly was to say how we should
It's
act in
to,
order to avoid
yeah.
those smart
Like
things.
of course, like how I can recall. I mean, I was a child back then, but I can recall how shocked Israelis were when you said that Turkey is going to become dominant in the Middle East. And with Turkey, they're our friends. They're completely secular and we're completely connected. We go there for vacation every year. What changed? How could things change? And things changed 10 years later.
Exactly. Exactly. By the way, in that book, I'm saying also that 30, 40 years from now, a regional power is emerging. And if I'll tell you who that nation is going to be, you'll be shocked at this point of time. Okay? But the idea is to understand how change and transformation is taking place.
Yes.
And though that change takes a lot of time to mature, but
Mhm.
if you see its seeds as early as possible, then you can devise strategies that
Yes.
will benefit you in the long run. Would
Yeah.
you like to guess who that nation is going to be?
I'm hoping it's us because
Well, we are already a regional superpower.
we are okay.
Saying that Israel will be a regional superpower 40, 50 years ago, that was really
That was
something unusual,
shocking.
okay,
Yes.
shocking. But I'll tell you,
Yes.
from the way I understand how trends are evolving in this region, then Jordan is going to be one of the very dominant nation in this region, and we have to take it into account. Okay,
Yes.
if we are to take into account the long-term trends and benefit from those trends.
That's actually very interesting. You really caught me off guard there because
But
I
it's in
did
the
not
book. That means
expect.
you didn't read the book.
I read it, but a long time ago.
Long time ago. That's okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, I was a student. I went through 6 years of university, so I forgot a lot of things from before.
All right. That's
But
it.
I'll pay more attention. Two quick questions, just because most of our viewers are from these places. The United States. I know that they have a benefit of being between two oceans, and they're not really threatened by any other country, and they have positive immigration both by quantity and by quality of the people that arrive there to work. Um, so they will be the superpower forever from now on.
No, for at least the next century.
Okay.
Okay. The next century is still the Pan American era. Okay, most of the time, superpowers, the lifespan of a superpower in the ancient world, it used to be about 500 years.
Mm.
We have reached a point in which superpowers life expectancy is about 300 years.
Okay.
Okay, so it will be again the 300 years. They
Yes.
have the benefits, the advantages of superpowers are very clear, and the advantages of the American superpower is amazing
Huge.
by all means in terms of historical terms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the 21st century is still the American century, but again, things are always changing.
Of
No,
course.
there's no such a thing as forever.
Yeah. Don't worry, I won't come in 200 years and say, you were wrong. Why didn't you?
All
No.
right, okay.
And regarding Europe, we have a lot of viewers in Europe. We have a lot of friends now who are coming from Europe to live in, Jews who are making Aliyah, coming from Europe to live in Israel. And we always like to compare ourselves to Europe and how much it's nicer there, and tell our friends, why did you come here? What, you're living in Paris, it's beautiful. What is happening in Europe regarding the EU and the European nations?
Well, Paris used to be beautiful.
Yes.
I used to go, I have family in Paris, and I used to travel 5-6 times a year. Now, I barely, stop in my trips through Paris.
Yeah.
Europe is going through a very difficult time in their history. They were trying to bring 28 nations together and form a different kind of Europe. There are a lot of difficulties in that process, but I believe that Europe will get over those difficulties. They don't have any other, any other option.
No choice.
This is the only option to be able to bring together a lot of advantages.
Yeah.
And I hope that they will be able to form the EU community with some very strong and genuine ties in order to be a very important culture also for the 21st century and the 22nd century. They have a lot of difficulties, but I hope they will overcome them. That's basically, if you wish, in a nutshell. Of course, those difficulties, they have a lot of challenges. The most important challenge they have is their fertility rate. They are behind the replacement rate of 2.1 kids for each female. And that brings a lot of troubles because they need the manpower, they need people coming from different cultures like the US. But the problem is that they are attracting not the brightest,
No.
they're not the healthiest, let's say, young people from different cultures. And they need to take care of it. I don't know exactly how. I have devised one a few years ago, an idea how to do it, but I'm not going to elaborate on it right now. But they have difficulties. And the Western culture is an amazing culture by all means, the philosophy and technology and sciences. So
social structures.
Europe will continue to be a very important culture for the next centuries, not just one century.
So we're going to see a mild decrease, which will be followed in the next decades.
Exactly. And I'm not the one that say, well, in 30, 40 years, Europe is going to be, taken over by immigrants. I'm not going to say exactly from where. I'm not part of those people. I'm even a little bit afraid that there are some European cultures that might be even, again, aggressive against minorities, and they'll do their what they used to do during millennia. But as a culture, Europe is still has a very important role in history.
Yeah, there was a. It's fun. My spouse. She's Danish.
Okay.
She told me that in some county somewhere far in Denmark, but they made a new law that I think on Wednesdays in kindergartens you must serve pork for lunch to preserve Danish values. So these kind
That's a
of things.
reaction.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
That's the reaction. And the Europeans are very known as a culture that from time to time they do expulsions, they are very aggressive towards
yeah,
minorities,
yeah,
and we need to pray that it will not happen again.
yeah,
The only way that it will not happen again is that they will succeed in bringing a lot as much as possible nations, European nations, to be together to form a new kind of, let's say,
mhm,
continental institutions in order to balance those aggressive energies that are embedded within
yeah.
European culture.
Otherwise, they will solve problems in a primitive way.
Exactly, with a very aggressive and violent way.
Mhm. Okay. I mentioned before that we are seeing a huge wave of people making aliyah, especially now with Corona, but also before. You are describing Israel, if I can put it in one sentence, as having a bright future with many challenges ahead.
Yeah.
Can
Well,
you explain to us, please?
let me give you a perspective, okay?
Okay.
Because only when you have a very large perspective you can see the trends. You see, about 200 years ago, there were only 3 million Jews worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a matter of 140 years, up to World War II, a Jewish population worldwide, did an
18 million.
amazing leap of faith, if you wish, from 3 million Jews to 18 million Jews before World War II.
Yeah. Pour vous.
Exactly. The Holocaust was the most devastating crisis that the world Jewry has experienced in the last millennia. Okay, and after World War II, we were about 12 million Jews worldwide. In Israel, there were about 600,000 Jews only. Okay, now 70 years later, now in 2020, we are almost about 15 million Jews worldwide. Okay, and the largest Jewish community after 2,600 years from the destruction of the first temple. For the first time after 2,600 years, the largest Jewish community resides in Israel. We're about something like almost 6.8, 6.9 million Jews in Israel. The second largest Jewish community
In
now is
America.
in the US, 5.7 million Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first time, this is the largest Jewish community, okay?
Yeah.
And in about 5 to 10 years, will be about 50% of world Jewry will reside in Israel. Now, 50% means the following. An amazing, point in landmark in history, okay? Because at least 2,800 years ago, that was not the case. Okay, even before the destruction of the first temple, a lot of Jews went to Babylon, to Egypt, to Rome, to a lot of places. Most of the time were not. The majority of Jews were here in Israel.
Yeah, like you can
Only
see
at the
with
beginning, at the time of King David, about 3,000 years ago. That's it.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Like you can see with what's it called, Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. That what is,
Exactly, but the Talmud Bavli has been written in the 3rd and 4th century
Mm-hmm.
BC. Okay, That's something else. Not BC, AC.
Yes.
Okay, that's only 1500 years ago. That's it. But
Mm-hmm.
the most important thing is that 30 years from now, okay, by 2050, there will be again about 18 million Jews worldwide. Okay, which means it will take about a century to recover from the Holocaust. But the most amazing thing is that out of those 18 million Jews, okay, before World War II, 12 million were in Europe.
Yes.
Okay, but a century after that, 18 million Jews back in the worldwide, but 12 million in Israel, which means about 70% of world Jewry will reside in Israel, which is mind-boggling by all means historically. By the way, if
Yes.
you stretch the trend to the end of the 21st century, by the end of the 21st century, there will be about 24 million Jews worldwide and 20 million in Israel.
Where are we going to put all of us?
That's another issue.
Okay.
this is the most challenging trend
Yeah.
that world Jewry will have to address in the 21st century.
That
In
we
the
need.
20th century, the challenging thing was to establish a homeland to,
Yes.
to whoever was left from a devastating crisis. Now we are speaking about a very different challenge, which is to build a homeland for two-thirds of world Jewry. That will be about 20 million Jews by the end of the 21st century and another 4 million minorities. So the only nation that is going to triple its population in the 21st century is Israel. So we need,
Yes.
in a matter of another 80 years, to build two
And
more
two more
states.
states.
This is an amazing challenge and probably will do a lot of mistakes, but
Probably.
the prospects are amazing. This is the 21st century. This is the context of the 21st century. That's why I said 21st century is a landmark in Jewish history. It's going to change what Judaism is, what religion, the Jewish religion is going to be, what the Jew is going to be. That's it. Turned to a different threshold. We crossed something. There is no back in history, and a century from now, Jewish history is going to be different. Jewish religion is going to be different. Jewish identity is going to be different. Jewish psychology is going to be different. The Jew that we know at this point in time in history is going to be very different.
Can
How
you give?
different? That's another issue. That's something that I'm trying to understand, and I'm about to publish a book about it. But
Yes.
it's going to be totally different with a lot of challenges. A lot of challenges.
Can you give maybe a small example just so we can understand? What do you mean that the Jew in Israel will be different? In what way?
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
But I need some time to explain it. But still, in a nutshell,
Yeah, just
the following is very important. You see, there were up to now, as much as I understand, 4 epochs in Jewish history. Okay,
mm-hmm.
the first epoch can be defined as the era of our forefathers or foremothers. Okay, the paternal kind of society. Okay, at the end there were the tribes kind of mindset. We were tribes scattered, fighting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
The second epoch was the epoch of the kings. The kingdom mindset, a centralistic kind of organization
King
with
David.
a very exactly with the very central city, economy, religion, etc. Um, everything
Everything.
was centered in one side. It was very hard to achieve, and it didn't succeed, because at the end, when the 10 tribes were scattered, and the Judea tribe that tried to develop that kind of a mindset has failed totally, and the failure was the destruction of the first temple and the expulsion
Diaspora.
of Jews
Yeah.
all over. The third epoch was the epoch of the priests.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the priests said, well, the two epochs brought havoc in Jewish history.
Yeah.
We are the ones that can bring social,
Social justice, let's say.
yeah, but a different kind of a social organization with social justice, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they also failed. They failed when
Yes.
the priest became very
Corrupt.
corrupt, and Jesus came and said, "You are corrupt." And I don't have to explain what happened after the destruction of the second temple. And then came the fourth epoch, what we call the rabbinical epoch. Okay, and with the Judaism as we know it now,
Yes.
is actually that rabbinical mindset. The Talmud was developed at that time, and the communal organization spread all over the world developed during the last 1500 years.
Mm-hmm.
What I found is something very interesting. I found that each epoch lasted something like 500 years. The last 200 years of each era were devastating years, a lot of conflicts, a lot of misunderstanding. And at the end of each era, there was a disaster, a historical disaster. After that disaster, we reorganized ourselves with a different mindset, a different paradigm, a different even Jewish and religious narrative. Okay, and we are at the longest era was the rabbinical era, but 200 years ago we started a different era in which new denominations, that challenged the rabbinical era from 1810, the reform movement
Yes.
said this is not the way to continue. And then
Or Zionism.
in 1890, the conservative movement, and then
Mm-hmm.
the Zionist movement, and then,
Mm-hmm.
the Holocaust, and the establishment of the state. We are, just last year, we finished probably the last 200 years of the rabbinical era. And the landmark is that about a year ago, the largest Jewish community resides in Israel. And when the largest Jewish community resides in Israel, that's a threshold. When we will reach 5-10 years from now, the next threshold, which is the 50% mark of the 50% world Jewry that will reside in Israel, we're going to start a different mindset. And that mindset is what we call the mind. If I am to explain in a very specific, very simple way, in the first era, the authority was the father and the mother, or the head of the tribe. In the second era, the authority, was the king. It's a very different kind of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And then the priest, and then the rabbi. Now, the how should we call a ribbon, the Anglit?
It's a good question.
A good question. I forgot the word in English.
Yeah.
I'm going to
Google Translate.
Google it. Okay. You Google it meanwhile.
Yes.
Anyway, so the idea is, for the first time, the sovereignty, the sovereign is not the rabbi or the priest or the king. The
Mm-hmm.
sovereign is the people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The people are the sovereign authority of what is it exactly Judaism? What is it exactly the narrative? What is it exactly the tradition?
Could that
Who are the
explain?
one?
Could that explain what we're seeing now among, especially from my time in Jerusalem, seeing religious people who disagree strongly with the Rabbanut?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But we are at the very long tail, the beginning of the long tail of
Okay.
something very, very important that is in the making. The sovereign is not the rabbi and the king and the priest anymore. It's the people. And just because of that, the people is going to redefine what Judaism is.
I see. I see.
And how exactly it's going to be redefined, that's another issue.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the authority has moved to the people for the first
Fascinating.
time in Jewish history.
Fascinating.
And therefore, something unusual is in the making. I'm not sure we will be able at this point of time to really understand how it's going to play out 50 years
Mm-hmm.
from now, 100 years from now, 300 years from now, but it's going to be different. And when they will learn history, they will say the fifth epoch started in 2020.
Fantastic.
And at that time, there was also a pandemic, but that's not
Yeah. Okay. The last part, I would like to have some questions from our viewers. Maybe some of the things you said could answer that. A lot of our friends working in Israel, studying in Israel, they feel that there are huge tensions between parts of the population here. They say it's because of the Chilonim. They say it's because of the secular people, the Haredi people, the ultra-Orthodox. They say it's because of Netanyahu. What exactly is happening here? Why is there so much tension?
Let me be blunt, okay?
Yes.
Something beautiful is happening because of that. Something very important is happening because of that.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a devastating tension that will bring social unrest and even assassinations of leaders, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But let me explain what's happening. The Jewish state was established upon the idea of um,
Covenant of faith.
exactly a covenant of the past.
Yes.
Okay, a covenant. We said different groups had different ideas what should be a Jewish state. Okay, there were those that said it needs to be a halachic state. Others
Yeah.
said no, it needs to be humanistic. Others
Yeah.
said it needs to be capitalistic.
Socialist.
Others said everybody has a different
Yeah.
kind of idea.
So socialist, communist, religious,
Exactly.
doesn't
The
matter. They're okay.
Zionist movement said, let's put aside all those ideas. Let's first establish a homeland that will protect us from the cruel, fate that we had during millennia.
Yes.
Okay? Now, we know that there are a lot of nations that were established upon that idea, the idea of a homeland that will protect us from calamities that use it from
Like the
slaughtering
United
we used
States.
to be, like the U.S. That's it, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But what we found is that it takes about 3-4 generations until, well, people establish the homeland. Now they start again thinking about what should be that the mission of that land. Okay, what's the idea of having that nation? Not what are we running from, but what we should strive to. And then all those ideas that was put aside are emerging again to the upfront of our consciousness, and we start debating what is it exactly a Jewish state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a state for Jews. That's something else. That's we have achieved. We are
Yes.
now 50% Jews here. Okay, but what does it mean? A Jewish state that is also a modern state, that is very advanced, that
Yeah.
has a large group of minorities. What is it exactly? So we
Mhm.
need to devise a, a future mission for future, let's say, raison d'être.
Okay.
Okay, now
A
the
reason for
nations are going
existence.
through, exactly, nations are going through that
Process.
process of thinking, and in that process there's always a clash of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
This is at the stage in which we are now. We are clashing about what kind of a Jewish state we are here to develop, for not for the next 70 years, for the next 500 years.
Yes.
Okay, now it's so normal that we clash at this point. Even there is even a chance of a civil war. This is what's happening most of the time in that process of emergence. This is a very, very important process to go through. And I'm not afraid of it. On the contrary, I'm thrilled. We have reached a point in which, our economy is great, our society is somehow established. We are a regional superpower, and they better not mess with us because we know how to protect ourselves. Now, okay, what is it exactly to be Jewish in the 21st century?
Mm-hmm.
What is it exactly a nation with a Jewish idea? What is it? So this is what we call the dream of our forefathers for millennia to reach this point. And in this point, we are clashing. That's good. And in the clash, we will be very creative, and we will create a new idea
Mm-hmm.
in the Jewish history. The most important idea of the 20th century is Zionism. It was not a new idea, but establishing a Jewish state, that was mind-boggling for most
Yeah.
of the Jews.
The difference between talking about it and making it happen.
Exactly. Now we need to come up with a new idea. What is it exactly, the mission of a Jewish state that is a mission that reflects tradition, that reflects challenges of humanity of the 21st century, and how you combine all these and bring also minorities to accept a new idea of a state. The idea of the US was personal freedom. Okay, the idea of the French was
Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
fraternité, égalité, exactly. These are ideas that that bring together large group of population to strive and build a nation. We are at a stage in which the French were before the
Civil War.
devastating war there, and before the U.S. was in their civil war, and we are part of a system that is evolving, and I'm not afraid of that tension. On the contrary, tension is the basis for creative ideas.
So the question should be then, can we afford a situation like what you're describing right now, taking into consideration our neighbors, the Palestinians, Iran, Turkey?
Well, it's part of
infighting?
the formula that we need to devise, because we are clashing here with another group of people that believe that we are just a religion. We are not a nationality. You see, the Arab world is saying you are a religion without a
Rights of a nation.
the right to define yourself as a nation. Like they are saying, like, look, it's like Christianity. You can be a Christian, a German Christian, a French Christian, and you can, clash with each other.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a Jew, a French Jew, an American Jew. What do you need? A nation, a Jewish nation? There is no such a thing in history.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, on the contrary, we as a religion, we used to have a nationality layer to our identity. We lost it for different reasons. Now we are coming back to it, and we are going to add to that religious identity. We are going to add also a nationality layer. And this is the clash. So it's part of what is it exactly a Jewish state?
Okay.
That's part of the formula that we need to solve somehow.
Yeah. Through the strife.
I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic about who's going to solve it. In my coming book, I'm trying to figure out who are going to be the leaders that will take the Jewish nation into that higher level of consciousness. Okay, so, but generally speaking, it's not my generation. My generation was to build a homeland, to protect ourselves from being slaughtered again and again and again.
You did your job.
No, well, the next generation, those people that are 20 years old now, when they will be 60-year-old, they will have to come up with new ideas. What is it exactly the raison d'etre of a Jewish state with a large group of the minorities and a Jewish state that reflects ideas of humanity, of the 21st century, of sciences, etc. It needs to be a blend of something new that will reflect, of course, our raison d'etre, and people around us will accept it and will say, oh, now we understand what's your contribution to the to this region and to your contribution to the world. And then we will accept you as a nation with a religion, etc., etc.
Okay, I see. I see. The next two very quick questions. You mentioned in one of your lectures that Israel is having a huge population growth. 45% of Israelis are age 25 or under.
Exactly.
And so you're predicting a huge boom in the economy of Israel in innovation. The question is, what regarding the minorities that we have in Israel, and more specifically, the ultra-Orthodox population, which seems to not really take part in this project?
Okay, I'm going to shock you. Are you ready?
I'll be happy. That's what I'm here for.
Be happy. A century from now, okay, we are not going to see Haredim. We are not going to see a modern orthodoxy. We are not going to see ultra, let's say, Chilonim, okay?
Okay, totally secular. It's not.
What we see now, the movements within Judaism, as it used to be for forever, those movements only reflected historical, events that are happening. Movements constantly changed within Judaism. So a century from now, we're going to see different movements. We're not going to see the movement. We're not going to see the Zionist Orthodox, the ultra or Haredim. By the way, Haredim is only something new in Jewish history. It's only 300 years ago started. It's not forever. Okay, so a century from now, we're going to see different movements within.
So your answer is essentially to stop doing linear extrapolation to the situation. Okay.
Exactly.
You mentioned in your book that Israel will have no choice, or almost no choice, but to go to war in the north.
Yes.
Against
we see it.
Iran, and we are seeing
Exactly.
right now.
We are trying to do it in a very low profile.
Yeah, but
But
can
there's
we? Sorry,
but
can we? Considering our growth in population, um, are our leaders aware that we are probably going to a war? We will probably need to settle more lands. We are having these strifes and things like that.
we don't have to take over more lands.
Okay,
Nowadays, you know,
I'm happy to hear that.
you can condense a large group of population and build amazing cultures. You know, take a
Mhm.
look at Manhattan, the most dense, you know, piece of land worldwide, and it's very, you know, very advanced by all means.
Mhm.
But but again, we are here part of something much, much bigger in history. It's not the conflict between us and our neighbors. It's part of something much, much, much larger. It's the
Mhm.
conflict between East and West, between Europe and Russia, between Russia and the US. We are just, you know, part of something much bigger. And
Yeah.
that bigger thing uh, is bringing large powers from the east to, to settle in this region. And we will have to push those powers in order to
Mhm.
survive. And it's never going to end. You know, that pendulum of east and west is already
Always.
happening millennia.
Yeah.
And probably we are at a certain point in time in which we are the dominant force in this region. There
Mhm.
were other times in history that we were not, but this is
Yes.
and the fear that is ranging in this area brings others to try to take over this region. And our fear will push them.
Yeah.
And this is history. This is
Yeah.
not something
Yeah.
new.
It always seems mind-boggling to me. Why would you threat a country with a Holocaust syndrome with annihilation? It's the
Exactly.
you need to
That's because
pause
they
it.
are afraid from us.
They are afraid from us.
Yeah, that's what we don't understand. That's one of the
Yeah.
most important variables that bring tension and conflicts. People are afraid from other people
Mm.
constantly.
Mhm.
The Iranians are afraid from us. The Lebanese are afraid from us. The Palestinians are terrified from us. And we are terrified
Afraid of them.
from them. And so the fear is already from prehistory. And
Yeah.
the fear is embedded in human cognition,
Mm.
in human epistemology,
Yeah.
if you wish. Okay, we are constantly afraid from our neighbors that they will take over whatever we have. It
Mhm.
started from the Bible already.
Yeah. Of course. Kain and Evel.
Exactly.
So if I have to summarize what you're saying, if you have some money to invest, you would put it on this startup called the State of Israel.
Of course.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Two personal questions and we will be done for today. Um, well, first, the first one you already answered. You are an optimistic, as you said.
And I'm not a dumb optimistic. I'm a
No,
realistic optimistic. Okay.
yeah, of course, of course. It's yeah. You're not happy because you're stupid.
Exactly.
You know the dangers, but you are meeting them head on. Um, are you sometimes, it's a bit of a personal question maybe, are you sometimes a bit scared of telling people what you discovered?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And the reason is that uh, many times people kill the messenger.
Yes, that's true.
And that's the problem, which is, you know,
Yeah.
this is humanity. This is you. But sometimes, you know, I'm not saying things that are frightening because I know that people will be frightened. Even though in this pandemic, for example, I became in Israel the person that is
Yes.
constantly saying,
Yeah.
be careful, be careful, be careful. Things might be worse than you think. So I became the pessimistic
Yeah.
futurist. But I'm not pessimistic, I'm realistic. I know that this pandemic will last 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Well, I'm very glad to hear that. Professor Passig, thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor. And hopefully in 2 to 5 years, when Corona is over, we can even meet in person and have another interview like this.
Bezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Take care.
You too. Thank you very much.